Statements to investigators after claiming to be the victim of a racial and homophobic attack in Chicago in January. Now, in a moment, we'll be joined by his defense attorney, Mark Garagos. Smollett's been out on bail since being charged last month with a single count of felony disorderly conduct. Smollett claimed that his supposed attackers threw a chemical at him, put a tree, a reference to President Trump's campaign slogan, of course. But police and prosecutors now believe the actor paid two brothers $3,500 to help stage the whole thing. Law enforcement sources say records show the brothers bought rope at a hardware store, and this surveillance video appears to show them buying a ski mask and a red hat, among other items. Our Nick Watt has been following the case closely. He joins us tonight. So, Nick, how did Smollett go from facing one count to facing 16?
Well, what it appears prosecutors are doing here is basically every crime that Jussie Smollett claimed he was a victim of, that is now one count against him, because they're saying that is one lie he told to authorities. They also say that he in fact told his story twice, first to a police officer, then to a detective, so that doubles it up. That takes it up to 16 counts. Now listen, even if he is found guilty of all 16 counts, the sentencing guidelines are still just as you 16 counts. Now listen, even if he is found guilty of all 16 counts, the sentencing guidelines are still just as you just said. Jussie Smollett claimed that he was attacked in the early morning hours of January 29th in Chicago by two men who put a noose around his neck, shouted racist and homophobic epithets at him, and he says that he fought them off. Now, two men were arrested, and apparently they told police and they told the grand jury that in fact Jussie Smollett had cut them a check for $3,500, that he had orchestrated the entire thing and that they were just going along with his plan. Now, Smollett is now out on bond, but the superintendent of Chicago police, he said that he believes Jussie Smollett did this because he wasn't getting enough attention, he wasn't getting enough money to appear on the Empire TV show, and that's why he did it. Smollett has been now suspended from that show. But interestingly, you know, the superintendent also claimed that he thinks Smollett sent a letter, a hate mail, to himself, and there is no mention of that letter anywhere in these 16 counts. But basically what they're saying here is that Jussie Smollett lied to police, and he knew that he was lying when he was telling them that story. Anderson?
And he's still saying that he is completely innocent.
Absolutely. He has maintained his innocence throughout, and I believe we're going to hear from one of his lawyers shortly. And, you know, his lawyers have also said that they believe that the investigation was flawed, and they point to a number of leaks, they say both true and false, that came out of the investigation. Interestingly enough, the Chicago police did tell us yesterday that they have launched an internal investigation into those leaks. So, yeah, he is fully maintaining his innocence. We just heard from the lawyers saying that this is prosecutorial overkill and that Jussie adamantly maintains his innocence. Anderson?
Right. Let's, Nick, appreciate it. Thanks very much. So let's talk to Jussie Smollett's defense attorney, Mark Garagos. Mark, thanks very much for being with us. First of all, what is your response to these 16 felony counts that he's now facing? And is this right, that it's basically one count for each alleged lie that he told?
You know, Anderson, even if he were supposedly the one who had orchestrated this is an outrage. The fact that he maintains his innocence makes it even more outrageous. 16 counts. I defy anybody to find any indictment anywhere where somebody has brought 16 counts for being a victim of a hate crime, basically. The problem with this case, and it started with almost immediately, is
they're not bringing
hold on
16
for one second,
counts.
Anderson, because you just put it.
Okay,
they're bringing 16 counts. They're bringing 16 counts because they parsed out two statements. I defy you to find something like that. He was not suspended. They have not talked to one person at Fox who has said he was dissatisfied with his money. They have not interviewed one person connected with the show Empire who says he was dissatisfied with his money. They have not. They are the ones who started their internal investigation about the leaks because all of the information that was being leaked was false. And I wasn't at Northwestern Hospital. Northwestern Hospital is supposedly, if you believe the reporting, let go of 50 people because 50 people have illegally accessed his records. What is happening here is, frankly, a media gangbang of this guy of unprecedented proportions. And that's the reason I got into this. I've never seen a media pendulum swing more quickly and more viciously and rob somebody of their presumption of innocence like this case. It's startling the way people assume that he's guilty. He hasn't been given one stitch of discovery. Not one. There isn't one police report. Your package just said he paid $3,500. I've got the texts. Those texts, and they conceded that the check and the texts were for training. It wasn't to pay anything. So I don't understand where any of this comes from. He supposedly paid for it. He's the one who supposedly was dissatisfied. There's no evidence of that.
So you're saying the police, no one from the superintendent had talked about this theory that he wanted more money, he wasn't happy. You're saying they haven't talked to anybody associated with their production at all. So, but I mean, does it make sense
So
to you?
wouldn't you expect if a police chief, hold on, Anderson, if a police chief is going to come out and say, and give a press conference, and is going to say he was dissatisfied, and is going to basically taint the jury pool, wouldn't you expect that there would be some basis upon which you would do that? Wouldn't you expect one person would have been interviewed who actually knew something about this, was negotiating his salary, his agent, somebody on the set, his producer, anybody? Wouldn't you expect that at the very least?
So why did it, I mean, if your version of events, if you know your client is sticking by the version of events that he has publicly given, why would these two brothers who I guess Smollett knows and was paying for training services or was using as a trainer, and there are checks between them, or at least a check between them, why did they attack Jussie Smollett using Trump language and a noose and all these things, which, I mean, there's, you know, and a liquid. Why are you alleging that they did that?
I haven't interviewed them, but I will ask you this. Why is it that if they did this and if they were in cahoots and you went in front of a grand jury, why weren't they indicted? Number one. Number two, the police chief is the one who says that they waited until the 47th hour before all of a sudden they were visited and they changed their story and they haven't been given immunity. Why is that? And by the way, if these two witnesses if they believed these two witnesses, why didn't they go through with a preliminary hearing and put the witnesses on and let them tell their story? There are media requests pending. As soon as the media requested to be able to do the preliminary hearing yesterday, they ran in yesterday and did a grand jury indictment. As soon as I sent him back to answer questions on an airplane, they didn't do the grand jury anymore, and they filed a criminal complaint. Anybody who is in the criminal justice system, I defy you to find one commentator who hasn't been caught up in this kind of this media lynching. Find one legal commentator who tries cases who says, I'm familiar with a prosecutor who comes out and gives a closing argument at the bond hearing.
Doesn't it just seem weird to you that you get allegedly attacked by two people who you know, and you don't seem to recognize them, even though you claimed you fought back and they ran away, and that I believe initially Mr. Smollett said one of them was white or they were white. Isn't it just weird that you get allegedly attacked by two people you actually know, who've actually been on Empire, who you've actually worked out with, and you don't recognize them?
Yeah, yes. But guess what? I don't know whether he made that statement but what I do know is that when he was told that they had evidence against these two, he refused to sign the complaint because he could not believe it. If he thought they were in on it, would he have signed the complaint? Wouldn't he have signed the complaint? He didn't believe it. Now, if you're asking me what their motivation is, I suppose I could speculate, but motivation of Jussie is not an element of the crime. Their motivation, I've got my theories on it, but I haven't seen one piece of evidence, and they don't have one piece of evidence that they've turned over that links Jussie to this. What they do have is a whale of a case. As if you believe what the police chief is saying, they've got a great case against the two brothers. They've
around President Trump, mainly from Congress, and the president's reaction to it. He thundered presidential harassment this morning without mentioning by whom. He also tweeted about what he called dishonesty in the media and claimed falsely that the judge who sentenced Paul Manafort last night also said there was no collusion between the president and Russia. He didn't actually say that, only that the case itself wasn't about collusion. He also went on a tear about Michael Cohen, tweeting, "Bad lawyer and fraudster Michael Cohen said under sworn testimony that he never asked for a pardon. His lawyers totally contradicted him. He lied. Additionally, he directly asked me for a pardon. I said no. He lied again. He also badly wanted to work at the White House. He lied." It's been a heavy Twitter week for the president about the various investigations, including the 81 letters the House Judiciary Committee has sent out seeking documents. And I'm quoting now that they realize the only collusion with Russia was done by crooked Hillary Clinton and the Democrats, Nadler, Schiff, and Dem, heads of the committees, have gone stone cold crazy. 81 letters sent to innocent people to harass them. They won't get anything done for our country. Now, just to be clear, some of those people the president called innocent include convicted or admitted felons. But we want to look more now on the investigations already on tap and perhaps down the road. Joining us, two Democratic House members, Congresswoman Katie Hill of the Oversight Committee and Congressman David Cicilline, who sits on the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Appreciate both of you being with us. Congresswoman Hill, the president is calling Michael Cohen a liar. Michael Cohen is calling the president a liar. Is it clear to you exactly who's telling the truth here? Because the reality is both men have a very complicated relationship with the truth.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that we have one man who lied to protect the president. We have a president who's calling him a liar over and over again because that's the only thing he's got to destroy the credibility that exists, what limited credibility exists. But the reality is that we don't have we're never going to rest our entire case on Michael Cohen's testimony. We were never going to. But what we do have is the evidence that he brought in with him. We have the 15 checks that he brought that show that Trump himself made payments that could amount to basically fraud or campaign finance violations. And that's the physical evidence that we're looking for. Does it really matter that he said that, maybe he didn't, I don't know, before he started cooperating with the special counsel and stopped trying to cover up for Trump, that he had tried to possibly let his lawyers investigate a potential pardon? I don't know. I just don't think that this matters. I think we got to be looking at the bigger picture, and that's what we got to stay focused on.
Congressman, President Obama's former senior advisor, David Axelrod, tweeted earlier this week about the document request from your committee, saying, quote, "The wide-ranging nature of it too easily plays into the witch hunt meme." Do you think he has a point at all? Would a more targeted request have been a better strategy here, or are you good with the 81 contacts?
No, look, we should be clear about this. During the Obama administration, just as a contrast, Republicans during the Obama administration made requests for literally millions of documents. That's not an exaggeration. So this is the beginning of the Judiciary Committee investigation. We've requested documents from 81 individuals and organizations, very targeted. And in fact, what we've asked them to do as the initial response is give us what you've already given to the special counsel or to the Southern District of New York. So they've already done their review of these documents. Their lawyers have looked at them. They're probably on a thumb drive. Just let us start with that so that we get caught up to speed. Part of the problem is the Judiciary Committee hasn't done oversight in the last 2 years at all. We had a over 500-page document detailing our efforts to persuade the Republicans to do some oversight. They refused to do it. So we're doing this work, and we have to begin by gathering these documents so that we can make determinations to how we proceed from here. But look, this is our responsibility. We take it seriously. The good news is, the president keeps saying, all we're going to do is investigate. While we're doing these investigations, we passed the most comprehensive ethics reform bill since Watergate today. We passed 2 common sense gun safety pieces of legislation. We've begun hearings to drive down the cost of prescription drugs. So the good news is we can do both things, move forward on the agenda for the American people and hold this administration accountable.
Congresswoman Hill, you said earlier today that there are whistleblowers, as in more than one, that are in touch with your committee. Generally, what kind, and if you can say, what kind of things are they providing the committee, and has it yielded anything useful yet?
Well, this is around the security clearances and the information that was requested by the committee and by the chairman to really clear up what that process looks like and why the president overruled decisions and recommendations that were made to not issue security clearances to members of his own family. So this is, that got reported by whistleblowers. We've got other things that were reported by whistleblowers around the arrangement with Saudi Arabia. The potential nuclear capabilities that are going to be transferred to Saudi Arabia. There's just so many instances where we're getting information from possible whistleblowers, and this is something that we have to investigate fully. And are these whistleblowers alleging wrongdoing? Oh, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. That's why they're whistleblowers. Whistleblowers, yeah. I mean, it seems obvious, but I just have to ask. Congressman Cicilline, has the Judiciary Committee had any interactions with whistleblowers inside this administration that want to provide information to your committee, the Judiciary Committee?
Well, we've just made our document request, as you know, this past week. I think the good news is the Trump administration is learning that there are people within his administration who are very concerned about the misconduct and about some of the decisions that have been made and the potential conflicts of interest or criminality. So they're sharing information. I mean, the security clearance is a very recent example. This is about the security of our country. The president not only overruled the intelligence and law enforcement communities, he lied about it. He said he had nothing to do with it. We now know that's not true. We know Jared Kushner, his family was financed in their Fifth Avenue property by the same company that's trying to sell nuclear materials to the Saudis. We know that Ivanka Trump has now gotten trademarks from the Chinese while we're negotiating with the Chinese on trade. So there's a lot of reason to be concerned about the issuance of these security clearances, which go to the heart of our responsibility to keep America safe and to protect the national security of our country. So I expect we're going to continue to see people who are conscientious whistleblowers who want to be sure the American people know the truth. And all the committees of jurisdiction are going to have to rely on that to the extent the White House continues to resist our efforts to get these documents and get this information. And my colleague is absolutely right that this does come down to the safety of the American people. You don't have whistleblowers who are doing this to cause drama. They're doing this because they fear for what our president is doing that jeopardizes American lives and jeopardizes our alliances and jeopardizes our position and our standing in the world. And right now, that is exactly what we don't know. We've had a Congress for the last 2 years that has been doing everything it can to protect this president and to make sure that the information that's out there is not being made available to the public. And what we're doing right now is trying to make sure that we're able to show that and to really get to the bottom of this and to expose the truth. We're not out to get anyone. We just want to make sure that that information is known and take that path wherever it leads us.
Congresswoman Hill, appreciate it. Congressman Cicilline as well, thank you so much. I want to dig deeper now into this question of Michael Cohen, his credibility, pardons, and another big week of developments in Washington and back in the Southern District of New York. Joining me for that, CNN senior legal analyst Preet Bharara, who served as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. Preet, when you were a federal prosecutor, how did you handle situations where two people who have a history of lying are both accusing the other of not telling the truth?
I mean, that happens from time to time. When you decide to arrest someone who's part of an organization or a group or an organized crime family, where both the party that is trying to flip and the party against whom that person has flipped have committed crimes and crimes of deception, including lying, then you have your work cut out for you. And you got to make sure that when you decide to sign someone up as a cooperator and rely on their testimony, and more importantly, ask someone else, namely a jury or a finder of fact, to rely on their testimony, you have to corroborate it. And you want to make sure that when that person goes and testifies in other contexts, like Congress, for example, that he's not subject to a criticism that even after having pled guilty to lying, that he's not still lying. And, you have, again, I think overall, I agree with the people who say Michael Cohen was, generally speaking, credible on the important points, on the material points, but he has some troubles, and that's not great for him.
Michael Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, confirmed, in fact, that Cohen had explored a pardon with the president's attorneys in the past, but that the, quote, new Michael Cohen wouldn't accept a pardon if the president offered it. The new Michael Cohen, I mean, it's certainly a defense I've never really heard before. Have you?
No, I haven't. And again, I don't think it goes necessarily to the core of the testimony. Like what happens in court all the time, this was not a court proceeding, this was a congressional hearing, which is a far cry from an orderly court proceeding. You will have cooperating witnesses who will have hiccups along the way. sometimes, unlike in Congress, they may testify for 3 or 4 days at a time if it's a complicated scheme, RICO or something else along those lines that they're testifying about. At the end of the day, the prosecutor asks the jury to consider the entirety of the testimony and the materiality of all the testimony and says, look, with respect to these couple of things, in the hypothetical, he seemed to stumble a little bit, but look at what the other testimony was. Look at how it was corroborated. Look at how he testified and spoke confidently and honestly about the payment to Stormy Daniels and the other woman, and he had the checks to show it. And those checks clearly show Donald Trump's signature. So focus on that, ladies and gentlemen. Don't focus on this sort of semantic back and forth about whether or not he talked about a pardon, the timing of talking about a pardon, who asked for the pardon first. That's not important, and that sometimes works, and it sometimes doesn't.
Right. I mean, isn't the counter argument to that? Well, if you're willing to lie in front of Congress about things which aren't important, about asking for a pardon or whether or not you wanted a job in the White House, then what does that mean about the things that are really important?
Yeah, look, at the end of a trial, a judge says to the jury something like, you're allowed to consider the overall credibility of the witness based on particular, untruths that they may have told. But you're also allowed to consider whether or not the person was truthful about a number of things and maybe fudged or maybe had problematic testimony on others. And that's the job of the persuader, whether it's a prosecutor or a member of Congress, in an impeachment type proceeding, to make the argument. I think overall, the people who are watching and paying attention have to be persuaded that on the points that are important, the truth was told.
We still don't have a report from Robert Mueller, but regardless of what he finds, the reality is the president, is still facing tremendous legal exposure from all of these other investigations. Is it the one being run by the SDNY that would likely concern him the most, or should likely concern him the most?
Yeah, I think so. There's lots of things swirling around, but on the one issue on which there has been clarity from both someone who has decided to cooperate, who has pled guilty, we're talking about Michael Cohen, and his view has been endorsed by my former office in the Southern District of New York, and the plea allocution has been approved, and the plea was approved by a sitting federal court judge, is the assertion that Donald Trump committed a crime in directing Michael Cohen to make certain payments on the eve of the election. That's a flat statement by Michael Cohen. He said it multiple times. It's been endorsed by those two other institutions that I mentioned, the prosecutor's office and the court. And now you have, based on the congressional testimony, other evidence, including the checks that were provided, including common sense. Why would it be the case that payments would be made by a lawyer through some complicated subterfuge like an agreement, an agreement with a lawyer, if it wasn't for the benefit of the client and the client knew about it? So yeah. I think if you didn't have that document in the Department of Justice, in the OLC office, that says a sitting president can't be prosecuted, if you were an ordinary person, I think I'm coming closer and closer to the view that the President of the United States, if he were not the president, but were an ordinary person who was implicated in this way, with common sense evidence, with documentary evidence, and with witness testimony, even from someone who's a little bit problematic, he'd probably be chargeable today.
Wow. If he was a regular citizen, he would be chargeable today.
I said I'm getting very close to believing that to be true. I don't know all the evidence. I don't know all the problems. I haven't looked at all the comparable case law, because it's one thing to accept a guilty plea from someone for a particular crime when you're also charging him with something else. It's quite a different thing to go to trial against someone else who is involved in that scheme. Those are different things, and there's some gap there. But the more I hear and the more we learn, and the more we hear about the lies that were told about those payments, the closer I get to determining that if the president was an ordinary citizen, he would be worried about getting arrested. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Coming up next, the storm over Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's use of anti-Semitic tropes and the questions about the anti-hate resolution passed in the House. President Trump fueled the flames again today. We'll bring you that as well. Also, Jussie Smollett's legal problems just got a whole lot worse. We'll tell you exactly why ahead.
The city of Chicago.
We'll tell you exactly why ahead.
The city of Chicago.
Specifically mentioned the House member nor the anti-Semitic tropes such as dual loyalties and greed, which made it necessary. Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is the Congress member. She said, and I'm quoting, "I want to talk about the political influence in this case for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country," meaning Israel. Prior to that, responding to a tweet from journalist Glenn Greenwald about defending Israel, he says at the cost of free speech in this country, Congresswoman Omar replied with a tweet of her own, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby." Now, she's since apologized, but also tried to change the subject, saying, at the same time, I reaffirm the problematic role of lobbyists in our politics, whether it be AIPAC, the NRA, or the fossil fuel industry. It's gone on too long, and we must be willing to address it. So that's the backdrop to the House measure that the president criticized earlier today.
And I thought that vote was a disgrace, and so does everybody else if you get an honest answer. If you get an honest answer from politicians, they thought it was a disgrace. The Democrats have become an anti-Israel party. They've become an anti-Jewish party, and that's too bad.
Well, joining us now, CNN Global Affairs analyst Max Boot, who's just written an op-ed piece in the Washington Post titled Ilhan Omar is Getting Off the Hook. He's also the recent author of The Corrosion of Conservatism, Why I Left the Right. So, Max, I enjoyed reading your piece. You say that Democrats in Congress have missed an opportunity to show that they are, in your words, more honorable and righteous than their Republican colleagues. Can you explain what you mean?
Well, you know, what Congresswoman Omar said, Anderson, is really, to my mind, textbook anti-Semitism, because she was saying that people who support Israel are pledging loyalty to a foreign country. This is not something anybody says about advocates for the U.S.-British alliance or the U.S. alliance with Poland or the United Arab Emirates or any other country around the world. This is only something that people say about supporters of Israel, basically reviving this old anti-Semitic canard about dual loyalty. And it ought to be pretty easy for Democrats to call her out because they know what she is saying. But unfortunately, I think what you're seeing now is that while Democrats are comfortable calling out President Trump and the Republicans for their racism, and rightly so. I mean, I call them out for their racism, too. I mean, it's disgraceful and despicable what President Trump and the Republicans are saying. Unfortunately, Democrats are being just as tribalistic as Republicans, and they're hesitating to call out one of their own.
And in fact, giving President Trump an opportunity to turn the tables and be the voice calling out anti-Semitism, which is obviously I don't know if ironic is even the right word, but obviously, stands in stark contrast to what he said after Charlottesville about there being good people on both sides, talking about neo-Nazis.
Exactly. The Democrats are giving Donald Trump, of all people, an opportunity to posture as an enemy of bigotry, which is ridiculous because, as you were pointing out, the Charlottesville marchers who were saying Jews will not replace us, those are the people that Donald Trump was praising as some very fine people. And even his foreign policy slogan, America First, that's the same slogan that the pro-Nazi group in the 1930s used. So Donald Trump has built his whole career on racism. Remember, he came to political prominence pushing the birther conspiracy theory against President Obama. So he has no credibility to attack anybody else for bigotry or prejudice, and yet, because of this self-inflicted wound, Democrats are giving him the opportunity to do just that.
It was interesting. I had Senator Blumenthal on in the last hour and asked, twice actually, if he thinks the comments made by Congresswoman Omar were anti-Semitic, and he wouldn't answer really that question. He sort of changed the subject. Is it? I mean, Congress people on all sides don't necessarily usually attack people in their own party. But does it surprise you that the Democrats have kind of taken this route that what could have been just a condemnation of anti-Semitism, even if it didn't mention Congresswoman Omar, was then sort of morphed into this generic condemnation of anything bad?
Yeah, I think that's a bad sign for the future of the Democratic Party, Anderson. They did call out, the House leadership did call out Congresswoman Omar last month, but, she's a recidivist. She keeps on saying this, and this time around, Democrats are reluctant to call her out because they're getting a lot of pushback from the Black Caucus, from younger members, and including from presidential candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. To my mind, this is a bad signal about where the Democratic Party could be headed, because I just look at what happened in the United Kingdom with the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, who refers to Hamas and Hezbollah as his friends, and Jewish members of the Labour Party are fleeing, and they're saying that there is an institutionalized anti-Semitism that has taken root. We're a long way from that with the Democratic Party. We're not even close to that. Let me stress that. But you have to be vigilant about policing your own ranks and calling these things out, and it's uncomfortable to do so. I get that because this is one of your own, but Democrats need to show that they're better than Republicans.
Max Boot, I appreciate it. Thanks very much, Max. Jussie Smollett is in new legal jeopardy tonight ahead more than a dozen new criminal charges for the Empire star. What his defense team is telling us about all this next.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Well, tonight, Jussie Smollett's legal troubles are going from bad to worse. A grand jury today indicted the Empire star on 16 counts of felony disorderly conduct, namely false reports of a crime after he claimed to be the victim of a racist and anti-gay attack on the streets of Chicago. Police think it was all a work of fiction by the actor, who's out on bail after a single charge against him last month. A short time ago, I spoke with Smollett's defense attorney, Mark Garagos, who's maintaining Smollett's innocence. Isn't it just weird that you get allegedly attacked by two people you actually know?
Yeah, yes. And but guess what? I don't know whether he made that statement but what I do know is that when he was told that they had evidence against these two, he refused to sign the complaint because he could not believe it. If he thought they were in on it, would he have signed the complaint? Wouldn't he have signed the complaint? He didn't believe it. Now, if you're asking me what their motivation is, I suppose I could speculate, but motivation of Jussie is not an element of the crime. Their motivation, I've got my theories on it, but I haven't seen one piece of evidence, and they don't have one piece of evidence that they've turned over that links Jussie to this. What they do have is a whale of a case. As if you believe what the police chief is saying, they've got a great case against the two brothers.
With me now is New York Times columnist Charles Blow and CNN legal analyst Joey Jackson. Joey, just let's start with the legal aspects. I'm wondering what you make of Mark Garagos' argument at this point. Essentially, this is just overkill by the prosecutors, that they don't have the evidence, and their allegations that he wanted more money from Empire and more attention. That there's no evidence, according to Mark Garagos, that anyone from the police department has spoken to anybody at the production, so they have no way of even knowing that.
I know Mark Garagos. He's a colleague, obviously, of mine. I know him to be an outstanding lawyer and certainly a good person. Having said that, I see things completely different as it relates to this case. Now, just backing up a bit and reminding the viewers that this is an indictment. And what an indictment means is that there's reasonable cause to believe that a crime were committed, or crimes in this case were committed, and that Jussie Smollett committed them. There's no cross-examination in the grand jury. There's no judge in the grand jury. The grand juries don't get to vet the information that they're provided. The district attorney simply provides that information. 16 grand jurors are sit, and if a majority believes, they're not deciding guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, they're just deciding probable cause, then they'll indict. Having said that, I completely disagree with my colleague for a variety of reasons. Number one, as it relates to your cross-examination of him, essentially, which is, doesn't the story have to make sense? It has to make sense. And so when you parse the story itself and you talk about someone who's out at 2 in the morning in the frigid cold in Chicago, going to a subway, not giving the police his phone records, and then, oh, by the way, redacting them and giving them to them, and then telling him a story about how he saw the whites of, the eyes, and that's how he knew that they happened to be white, and it turns out they were black. None of the story makes sense, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then you get to the actual issues in and of themselves, which are, forgetting about the story, just the lies of which he told and the motivations. At the end of the day, the grand jury having indicted and a jury impaneled and will hear the case, you don't have to decide what motivations are. The superintendent was out there talking about how, hey, he didn't get enough pay, he did not get enough pay. That's not the issue. The issue is, did he lie or did he not? And I think based upon that, it's a very difficult case for the defense.
Yeah. Charles, does any of this make sense to you yet? I mean, you and I talked about this very early on in this
what
case.
What part of it?
I don't know. I mean, the whole thing just seems... I just don't understand it. I mean, Mark Garagos is saying there's, that basically seems to be pointing at these two brothers, that it says that there is evidence against them. There's none against Jussie Smollett. I'm wondering how you see this.
Right. So I was waiting for some defense. Because the evidence is laid out by the police department seemed very compelling. We didn't get to see it. They just told us about it, so I didn't get to read transcripts of interviews or anything, so you couldn't really make an assessment. You just had to take their word for it. And, you know, that's tricky with the Chicago Police Department. Let's just be honest about that. But it was compelling against him. And so I was waiting to see, because he kept maintaining that he was innocent, so I'm waiting to see what could you possibly say. It seems that Garagos is saying, now I'm going to put my client up against these two brothers, and the jury's going to have to see which of these two groups of people they believe. And Garagos' words, you have actual evidence that these brothers did something. You're going to have to give me proof positive that my client instructed them to do it, and where is the proof of that? And that maybe that's the defense. I agree with Joey. There are a lot of other things around that he said that are shaky, and I think we wouldn't even be talking about this were it not for the invocation of whiteness and of Trump support. Other than that, if it was just another black guy claiming, either being assaulted or claiming to be assaulted because he was gay, we wouldn't even talk. And that's a tragedy in America in and of itself. And I say to people who are white and feel like this is a group attack, or people who are Trump supporters and feel like this is a group attack, I actually understand that feeling, that tribal response to something and feeling like something that is targeted. Some people actually applies to the whole. But I want you to remember this feeling the next time that the president attacks a black man when he's kneeling, and for social justice, and why everybody who's engaged in social justice takes that as a tribal attack and responds as such, because they're responding exactly the way that you feel today. Every time he takes an attack on women and individual women, and all women take that as a tribal attack, this is that feeling. So I understand your feeling. Keep that energy and remember this feeling when the shoe is on the other foot.
Joey, just in terms of the legal, the timeline, what happens next?
Well, what happens next is you go, and on Thursday what will happen is he'll be presented to the judge. The judge will know and understand, or ask him whether he knows and understands that he's facing an indictment, what the charges are in the indictment. Once he has been read the indictment, and I would assume his attorneys would waive a public reading, they'll just ask whether he understands what he's being accused of. He'll enter a plea of not guilty. And then at that point, discovery, which I heard Mark say he hasn't had any or doesn't have adequate discovery, which is just the exchange of information, police reports, documents, etc. He'll get those. He'll be allowed to make any motions he wants. I know there's issues concerning, leaks in the police department, internal investigations. That's going to mean nothing. It may mean something as it relates to administratively charging police who are leaking things. It doesn't mean anything for his client. And then ultimately, his client will have his day in court where there'll be a full-blown trial. I mean, I just think there's a lot to be said, Anderson, for a mea culpa here. In the event that the evidence is as it is, you march yourself into the district attorney's office pre-indictment, and you say, hey, listen, we could resolve this. By all accounts, Jussie Smollett is an outstanding person, has done a lot for the community, is a very beloved figure. And if the evidence is as it purports to be, and I haven't heard it defended yet, I've heard a lot of accusations about the police and about people being fired from the hospital for leaking information. That means nothing as it relates to whether he's guilty or not. And it may be, time to settle up and get this thing done and over.
Joe Jackson, appreciate it. Charles Blow as well. You may have seen this on the broadcast earlier this week. Drew Griffin trying to get any kind of an answer from the man President Trump just nominated to be the next Interior Secretary, trying to any response about allegations he's serving